Welcome back to the Ant, episode 22. Today is November 17th, 2025. It's been a while since I recorded a podcast. I've been busy with life, but I've also been busy, reading up on things, paying attention to things, and doing a little bit more reading nowadays. There's been a lot of things that I've read this year that I haven't been able to talk about. Then, maybe I'd like to circle back to eventually a few things. The latest book that I've been reading, I'll discuss in a few minutes. I've been really focused on this Venezuela thing. The U.S. continues to antagonize Venezuela and Colombia, and continues to kill people on fishing vessels and on undescribed, hits. And, U.S. officials, Trump, Marco Rubio, Lindsey Graham, Pete Hegseth, all these warmongers, they keep, they say the quiet part out loud, they just say, we might hit them, we might do a land invasion, we might hit them with missiles, we're ramping up in the Caribbean, they're sending there's warships stationed in the Caribbean, very close to the Venezuelan coast. This is not just a show at this point. It's as a provocation of a potential, attack, in a war that Venezuela will have to defend. And Russia has already said and has already given Venezuela arms and says that they will continue to do so. Colombia stands with Venezuela. Gustavo Petro stands with Venezuela and sees an attack on Venezuela as an attack on Colombia, which is, the right call, not just because, protecting, a neighbor, an ally, but, is also protection against Colombian invasion or intervention and protecting Colombian sovereignty, because Colombia is also trying a left-wing project as well. Gustavo Petro is it's said, I don't know enough about Colombian history, but what I do know is that, people claim that he's, the first left-wing president of Colombia, and that this guy that is leading in the polls for next year's election is also left-wing. And so that's kind of in my opinion, a good thing in terms of, what policies and what is the focus of the Colombian government going forward. Is it, helping international business and capitalism thrive within Colombia, or is it helping the people of Colombia? And there's a lot of developments in that story, and it's hard to keep up with all of them, and also keep up with what's happening domestically, what's happening still in Palestine, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening in Cuba, what's happening all over the world. That's why, I try to study themes mostly, overarching themes, because that, makes it easier to understand. And even if you miss certain details about what's happening here or there, you kind of understand the plot for the most part, because all of these developments show patterns, and they show who has the most power in the world right now, how they're using their power, and how are they lashing out against growing power from other places, as in the US. Let me let this car and this truck pass here. So yeah, I mean, I keep saying it on the podcast that I'm going to release this Monroe Doctrine 2.0 article that I've been writing, and I will soon. Hopefully I finish it soon. But there's a lot of things that I got to do just to take care of myself and work and, exercise, keeping healthy, feeding myself, life is not easy, and this is one of the ways that, the powerful kind of keep us, in line and in check and kind of, for the most part, oblivious to what's happening in the grand scale. These military moves, these, imperialist moves and machinations and all this. I mean, there's a lot of misdirection and media and propaganda, which is something, my friend let me borrow this book called Propaganda by Edward Bernays. It was a book written or published in 1928, so it was a pretty old book. And so that, I'm going to kind of go through my favorite parts of the introduction in a little bit, because I want to kind of talk about the meat of the book with my friend on a future podcast, maybe the next one. And but I had heard of this book through Noam Chomsky, actually, a few years ago, because he references it quite a bit in some of his talks. And, the study of propaganda is something that, is almost necessary to understanding the world, because the things that we hear in the media about whatever type of issues, they're always through, a particular lens, and it can get painted in a particular type of way. It can lie or tell the truth. You can lie through propaganda, you can tell the truth through propaganda. And so in that way, it's kind of dangerous, because, it's important to know, when you're being lied to or when you're being told the truth. And it's not always easy to know. So that's why sources are very important, reading something that claims to be nonfiction, claims to be informative and factual. If there's no sources, if there's no, if numbers get cited but there's no sources for the numbers, if there's no, if the only people that are quoted are anonymous, always anonymous, like how you get in a lot of mainstream publications, you should be kind of wary of something like that. Mentioning Chomsky, there's been some developments in the Chomsky front. We already know that he's sick, and he's living in Brazil, I believe. And recently, I saw Glenn Greenwald, who's a journalist, and he has his own show, and he was a big part of the WikiLeaks story many years ago, and he's trusted by a lot of people. I don't really follow him too much nowadays, but historically I've liked what he's had to say. But he put out a video the other day talking about Noam Chomsky and how he is linked to this Epstein story. This Epstein story and the Epstein files have a lot of tentacles. It touches a lot of people. And so he was going through the, what has been published about the link between Noam Chomsky and Epstein. in how, they had a relationship, started in the 2000s or something like that. As a quick refresher, Noam Chomsky is like, a world-renowned linguist, political analyst, philosopher, is a big left influential person, like one of the most influential minds in terms of understanding U.S. imperialism, who controls the world really, like what forces, how do you, you gotta follow the money. Written a lot of books on propaganda, the most famous being manufacturing consent, which I've talked about before. And supposedly he had a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, okay? Jeffrey Epstein, had relationships with a lot of people, okay? A lot of influential people on purpose, We already know that Jeffrey Epstein was a informant for the Mossad, which is Israeli secret intelligence agency. He was an informant for the FBI. He was the leader of a pedophile ring involving some of the most powerful and rich people on earth. He was involved in a big blackmail ring that involved the pedophile ring. He was a big investor person, between these powerful people. So he was a big player that wasn't very known, a shadow player, in world politics and U.S. politics. So as the story goes, and this is what Glenn Greenwald, said, he said that according to the articles that have come out, Epstein facilitated different things for Chomsky, okay? Supposedly there was a financial transaction that he helped Chomsky with, over $200,000. He had email correspondence with him throughout a few years. At the same time, Chomsky would email with anybody. And just to say here too that there's no link between, there's no evidence to say that Chomsky had anything to do with corrupt money dealings or corrupt sexual things regarding Epstein. There's no links there. There's only links that they had correspondence with each other and they had a relationship up until 2017. And at that point it was known that Epstein, because Epstein had been convicted of soliciting, is that how you say it? Soliciting underage prostitute. And he had, I think, served his time for that, and supposedly Chomsky has said that once somebody serves their time, then it's kind of like a clean slate. It's consistent, I guess, with that belief. It wasn't known at the time that the man was a informant for two nefarious governmental intelligence agencies. It was not known, and people on the internet are kind of making a lot of claims that Chomsky, being a huge critic of Israeli apartheid and U.S. machinations, why would he associate it with a guy like Jeffrey Epstein? It wasn't known that Epstein was working for these arms, and he facilitated, he set up a dinner between Chomsky and Woody Allen. He set up a talk between Chomsky and the ex-Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak. And supposedly they talk, they why this is interesting to me is that, I like Chomsky, okay? I respect Chomsky's work and he's very influential. But I obviously hate Epstein. Epstein is like one of the most, the biggest monsters of this generation. So it's kind of like, how did they have a relationship? So let me just read this here. This is supposedly a letter written by Chomsky in regards to his relationship with Epstein. I met Jeffrey Epstein half a dozen years ago. We have been in regular contact since, with many long and often in-depth discussions about a very wide range of topics, including our own specialties and professional work, but a host of others where we have shared interests. It has been a most valuable experience for me. In the area of his own direct engagements, I have learned a great deal from him about the intricacies of the global financial system, about complex technical issues that arise in the often arcane world of finance, and about specific cases in which I have a particular interest, such as the financial situation in Saudi Arabia and current economic planning and prospects there. Jeffrey invariably turns out to be a highly reliable source with intimate knowledge and perceptive analysis, commonly going well beyond what I can find in the business press and professional journals. Given the range and depth of his concerns, I suppose I should not have been surprised to discover that Jeffrey has repeatedly been able to arrange, sometimes on the spot, very productive meetings with leading figures. On another occasion, Jeffrey arranged a meeting with former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, whose record I had studied carefully and written about. We have our disagreements, but had a very fruitful discussion about a number of controversial matters, including one that was of particular interest to me, the Taba negotiations of January 2001, in the framework of President Clinton's parameters, events that remain obscure and controversial because the diplomatic record is still mostly secret. Barak's discussion of the background was illuminating, also surprising in some ways. More lively interchanges in which Jeffrey was once again an active participant, often an effective gadfly. The impact of Jeffrey's limitless curiosity, extensive knowledge, penetrating insights, and thoughtful appraisals is only heightened by his easy informality without a trace of pretentiousness. He quickly became a highly valued friend and regular source of intellectual exchange and stimulation. So that term, a gadfly, I had to look it up the other day. To be an effective gadfly just means like a person who persistently annoys or provokes others through criticism, questioning, or other means. Someone who challenges the status quo, often by asking difficult questions or raising uncomfortable truths to provoke thought and action. Okay, so this is what we also know that Chomsky's wife also corresponded with Jeffrey Epstein as well, and tried to set up meetings, or did set up meetings between Chomsky and other people through Epstein. Okay, Epstein, this is me talking now, okay? Epstein obviously was a power broker extraordinaire. He connected the most powerful people. He had relationships with the most powerful and influential and richest people in the world. He obviously was smart, okay? He was a smart person, able to have, deep thought-provoking, insightful discussions, and it gives psychopath, right? Okay, somebody who you know doesn't really have the average human emotions, but can pretend that they are very human and are very good at pretending that they're very human. And he obviously was a super manipulator, so he effectively had a relationship with Chomsky. There's no and Chomsky supposedly wrote that he valued that connection, that connection that he was able to provide. To me, something about it rings a little weird, not just weird, but off. Chomsky is, like I said, is known. He's very influential. He's very, a powerful thinker. And, the U.S. power has never liked Chomsky. Israel and the Zionists that control Israel have never liked Chomsky, which makes me think that Epstein seeking out a relationship with Chomsky and keeping tabs on Chomsky for, Israeli intelligence and U.S. intelligence was a possibility. It was a possibility. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but if he was an informant, then why couldn't it have been, the case? Maybe in giving Chomsky a few things that he wanted and gaining the confidence and the trust of Chomsky, then maybe that gave Epstein the credence, the ability to say to Chomsky here and there, like, hey, maybe don't, yeah, but I wouldn't cover it like this, or I don't really see, the potential of this, maybe kind of subduing Chomsky's later years, effectiveness in later years. Who knows? We would really have to analyze the record and figure out what happened, because at this point Chomsky is like nonverbal. He's 96. He's not addressing the public anymore, and Epstein is dead. And also, the Epstein file is really everything that gets released, everything that doesn't get released. We have to be skeptical of it. We have to be skeptical of it because there's a lot of incentive for very powerful people to misconstrue what's in the Epstein files and lead away from them. I mean, there's a lot of people implicated in this saga of corruption. So yeah, that's what I gotta say about that. So yeah, let's get into this introduction. The introduction of Propaganda by Edward Bernays. Okay, why is this book important? Let me read a little bit about the author. This is the back of the book, okay? This is why the book is kind of important and influential, okay? The nephew of Sigmund Freud, Edward Bernays, pioneered the scientific technique of shaping and manipulating public opinion, which he called engineering of consent. During World War I, he was an integral part, along with Walter Lippmann, of the U.S. Committee on Public Information, a powerful propaganda machine that advertised and sold the war to the American people as one that would make the world safe for democracy. The marketing strategies for all future wars would be based on the CPI model. Over the next half-century, Bernays, combining the techniques he had learned in the CPI with the ideas of Lippmann and Freud, fashioned a career as an outspoken proponent of propaganda for political and corporate manipulation of the population, earning the moniker Father of Public Relations. Among his powerful clients were President Calvin Coolidge, Procter & Gamble, CBS, the American Tobacco Company, and General Electric. In addition, his propaganda campaign for the United Fruit Company in the early 1950s led directly to the CIA's overthrow of the elected government of Guatemala. So, this guy, Edward Bernays, is kind of like the father of modern propaganda, especially American propaganda. And that's why this book is important, because he details his thoughts on propaganda, how it's used, how it can be used to manipulate the masses and get the consent to do really whatever you want. And this book was essentially an advertisement to, powerful governments, powerful companies, to solicit Bernays' services. So, this is the introduction. My favorite parts of the introduction. The introduction was written by Mark Crispin Miller. This quote is in reference to the word propaganda. Prior to the war, the word's derogatory use was far less common than its neutral denotation. Here, for example, is the calm and accurate definition given in the Oxford English Dictionary. Any association, systematic scheme, or concerted movement for the propagation of a particular doctrine or practice. So, propaganda has a negative connotation nowadays, right? We think of propaganda as somebody trying to get something over on you, trying to mislead you. But there's a neutral definition to propaganda, and that's just this: any association, systematic scheme, or concerted movement for the propagation of a particular doctrine or practice. So it's in effect any sort of movement or advertisement for a particular, practice or way of seeing something. That can be good, that can be bad, that can be based on truth, that can be based on lies. It's neutral. Okay, going on. Although the practice had, albeit unnamed, been variously used by governments for centuries, Napoleon especially incisive on the subject, as well as an inspired practitioner, it was not until 1915 that governments first systematically deployed the entire range of modern media to rouse their populations to fanatical assent. So this is saying that propaganda used by governments is not something new, but, with, the revolutions in technology of the early 20th century, governments now were able to use and disseminate propaganda on a mass scale and really, fully exercise the power of propaganda with these technologies, whether it be radio, television, movies, you name it. So moving on. Now public opinion stood out as a force that must be managed, and not through clever guesswork, but by experts trained to do that all-important job. Thus, the war improved the status of those working in the fields of public suasion. And suasion just means like persuasion, which I did not know. So after the war, and really the success of the propaganda campaign for the war or for entering into World War One, in terms of the U.S. entering World War One. Propaganda now was seen by the business elite and by the governmental elite of the country as a worthy investment, something worthy of investing in, of expanding and using more. After that, you saw, boasting in terms of jobs for admin, and the show Mad Men is kind of it's based after World War II, but there was also, a huge propaganda campaign in service of going into World War II. So that show, I haven't seen every single season, but it kind of tells that story a little bit as well in a fictionalized way. So that's kind of interesting. Okay, going on. The Great Allied Campaign to celebrate or sell democracy was a venture so successful, and it seemed so noble, that it suddenly legitimized such propagandists who, once the war had ended, went right to work, massaging or exciting various publics on behalf of entities like General Motors, Procter & Gamble, John D. Rockefeller, General Electric. That reborn generation of admin and publicists, no longer common hucksters but professionals, sold their talents to big business. According to the propagandists' evangelical self-salesmanship, many of them were in fact sons of ministers, their revolutionary science would do far more than make some people richer. Just as during the war, propaganda would at once exalt the nation and advance the civilizing process, teaching immigrants and other folks of modest means how to transform themselves through smart consumption into happy and presentable Americans. So, in this quote, you kind of see that propaganda was really seen as a tool for a particular worldview, a particular philosophy, and a particular economic distribution, It was a way for kind of promoting and teaching people how to form themselves in a certain image, and that's why they wanted to use it, because it was so effective in that way. And this word about smart consumption, this is a way of selling products to people. Propaganda is a way of selling products to people, and certain types of products to people. So let's keep going here. What Mark Crispin Miller calls this faux progressive line, right? He said that propaganda seemed, at least to those who peddled it, as a wondrous new progressive force capable of brightening every life and every home. Like its wartime prototype, the post-war propaganda drive was an immense success, as it persuaded not just businessmen, but journalists and politicians that the manufacture of consent, in Walter Lippmann's famous phrase, was a necessity throughout the public sphere. They were selling a vision of a progressive, democratic, and civilized future, but also profiting from it. So no wonder they got high off their own supply. This propaganda is a manifestation of that. The future that they created with this propaganda was progress for them, and that they progressively got richer. They progressively got a more controllable mass of people, that were, complacently okay with the faux democracy or the faux progressive future that they were given, where, more people can vote, but we still give you the choices of who to vote for. Yeah, you got more options of food and cereals to buy from, but the money's all going to the same few companies. We're trying to protect, this democracy across the world, but we have to spend tax dollars and Americans' blood on fighting for it, and not really seeing the fruits of that labor back here at home. So, it's that's why, Miller calls it full progressive, and that's why these propaganda drives were and continue to be very malicious. Okay, so we continue here. Ironically, the same great war drive that had made that alien term propaganda commonplace had also made the neutral term pejorative. This was no accident, but a paradoxical result of the war propagandists' winning enterprise. For the propagandists had themselves besmirched the word by using it always and only in dark reference to the enemy. So this is just saying that, in using the term propaganda during World War I to describe, the propaganda of the German government or the Soviet government as like evil and immoral and all this, it got the public to associate propaganda with bad propaganda, not the neutral definition of propaganda, but propaganda equals something nefarious is happening, nefarious, mass hypnosis. And I think that definition of propaganda still holds today. Most people, when they hear propaganda, they think it's inherently misleading, which really that's most of what we're talking about in this book, really. Maybe throughout the book we'll talk about more, moral and truthful ways to disseminate propaganda, but we continue with the introduction here. Here we go. Here's another quote. George Creel was the director of the U.S. Office of War Information around the year 1920, right? The Germans having trashed the word, Creel claims, the Americans never used it to refer to their own output, but rightly favored other, more exalted terms instead. Quote, our effort was educational and informative throughout, for we had such confidence in our case as to feel that no other argument was needed than the simple, straightforward presentation of facts. Close quote. That was Creel talking about how he spoke on war information during World War I, and how the Germans were the ones that trashed the word propaganda, and that everything that was said by the American side was just a presentation of facts. Okay? Here we go. Let's get back into it. That passage is itself, of course, a stunning bit of propaganda, as it bluntly reconfirms the Manichaean plot that Creel and co. had hammered home throughout the war. Germans always lie, Americans always tell the truth. How the German propaganda had come to be associated with deceit and corruption is a question Creel would rather not address, preferring instead to bury it in that sly, passive construction. There is much to say about Creel's obfuscation or evasion of the fact that his own propagandists had associated German propaganda with corruption and deceit, and did so just as Creole does in that passage. So that's an example of the way in which these people who, make their money off being a propagandist, the extent to which they go to get that propaganda off, They will lie to the American public. They'll go in front of news reporters. They'll write books about it. They'll tell all their army officers, certain stories to rile them up for a war that is unjust and a lie. They will go. They'll say what they have to say to sell. Let's continue here. Indeed, as they learned more and more about the outright lies, exaggerations, and half-truths used on them by their own governments, both populations, the American and British, came understandably to see propaganda as a weapon even more perfidious than they had thought, but they had not perceived themselves as its real target. So I highlighted this part because, we can recognize that propaganda exists. We can recognize that propaganda has been used against ourselves. But it's easy to fall right back into it if you're not constantly on the lookout, if you don't learn and ingest and if you don't learn from the experience, then you're going to fall for the same trap. So this really can be true for all people. It's not just the American and the British. It's easy to fall back in. So constant education is key. Multiple sources for information. Don't just rely on one source. If you strictly read the New York Times, you're getting a particular point of view on the world, and it's more than likely, misdirected and not entirely based on facts. If you strictly watch Fox News or Breitbart News, same thing. If you strictly watch Al Jazeera, you might see the world in a particular way. That's why, if you're interested in a topic, if you feel like it affects you and you care about it, it's important to see the story and learn about the topic from many different angles, many different sources, and check their sources. Okay, here we go. Continuing on, Bernays attempts to rid the word of its bad smell. His motivation would appear to be twofold. Bernays always deemed himself to be both a truth seeker and a propagandist for propaganda, as he put it in another Apologia in 1929. On the one hand, then, his interest would be purely scientific, and so his effort to redeem the word is based to some extent on intellectual necessity, there being no adequate substitute for propaganda. In this, Bernays was right, and never quite gave up his preference for that word over all the euphemisms. His wish to reclaim the appropriate term bespeaks a serious commitment to precision. Bernays was not one to hype anything, not his clients' wares, and not his craft. So that's just a little tidbit on, the focus of Bernays with the book, Bernays' tone is managerial, not millenarian, nor does he promise that his methodology will turn this world into a modern paradise. His vision seems quite modest. The world informed by public relations will be but a smoothly functioning society, where all of us are guided imperceptibly throughout our lives by a benign elite of rational manipulators. Continuing. I highlighted basically the whole freaking introduction. Bernays derived this vision, from the writings of his intellectual hero, Walter Lippmann, whose classic Public Opinion had appeared in 1922. From his observations on the Allied propaganda drive's immense success, and his own stint as a U.S. war propagandist, he had arrived at the bleak view that the democratic El Dorado is impossible in modern mass society, whose members, by and large incapable of lucid thought or clear perception, driven by herd instincts and mere prejudice, and frequently disoriented by external stimuli, were not equipped to make decisions or engage in rational discourse. Democracy, therefore, requires a supra-governmental body of detached professionals to sift the data, think things through, and keep the national enterprise from blowing up or crashing to a halt. Although mankind surely can be taught to think, that educative process will be long and slow. In the meantime, the major issues must be framed, the crucial choices made by the responsible administrator. It is on the men inside, working under conditions that are sound, that the daily administration of society must rest. So this goes to how Bernays sees regular people. He thinks that regular people are incapable of lucid thought or clear perception. That you, a regular person who's listening to this, and me, a regular person reading this, is driven by herd instincts and mere prejudice, and frequently disoriented by external stimuli. We're not equipped to make decisions or engage in rational discourse. I don't know what to say. I'm not of that opinion. At the same time, too, there's a reason why, mass propaganda can work. And it's because over the long haul of constant projection of these themes, of these stories, of these myths, of this propaganda, little by little, these things do get implanted into the psyche of people. And it's not that we are just incapable of lucid thought or clear perception. Is that we're being manipulated, and we're being, from a very early age, being put on screens or being informed by textbooks missing, important information or important context, and that, creates a public that is misinformed. It's not that we are naturally incapable beings, it's making us sound like, programmable robots. And these people, the propagandists and their employers, would love a world where we are just robots, automatons. They try to create a world where year after year they turn us more into automatons and just cogs of a mass machine. And that's why we gotta learn about propaganda, because they're using it all the time. And it's very insidious, very, very, very dangerous technique, this propaganda thing. Here's a very famous quote by Bernays. "We are governed, our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of, These invisible governors are a heroic elite who coolly keep it all together, thereby organizing chaos as God did in the beginning. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. Bernays has a hierarchical view of the world. He thinks that certain people are more capable and should govern, and there's others that should follow. And that's important context to know when reading a book like this, because some people might read this book and just kind of agree, I mean, he was writing this book to people that would agree. So, although purporting vaguely to be one of us, it soon becomes quite clear that Bernays sees himself as an exemplar of that elevated supervisory network, just as he sees his own profession as the most important one up there. Thus, Bernays proceeds as both a truth seeker and a propagandist for propaganda. For while he did believe wholeheartedly in his hierarchical conception of democracy, Propoganda, the book, is primarily a sales pitch, not an exercise in social theory. In other words, while Propoganda, the book, is by no means an exhaustive treatment of its subject, the book is edifying for its own propaganda tactics, and for the light it sheds obliquely on the hidden zeal with which most winning propagandists do their work. Propoganda, the book, is aimed mainly at Bernays' potential corporate clientele, and yet the author variously masks that plutocratic bias. At the outset, his seductive use of us implies that he, like most of us, is just a fuddled propagandee, and not himself the ableist of invisible governors. In Chapter 1, he further mystifies the status of his usual customers by casting propaganda as a sort of populist endeavor, and not as an expensive game that is played best by those who have the most to spend on it. This is a very important point that Miller makes. Propaganda is a rich man's game, Propaganda is a dissemination of information for a particular end, right? Well, who has the money to disseminate information on a mass scale? Is the rich, is the powerful. If me it's not easy for me to, as an example, to get this podcast to have many listeners and viewers, Like, I would have to spend a lot of time on this thing. I would have to, spend a lot of money on advertising it and getting, people to even figure out that it exists. But the rich and the powerful, they can make a podcast be successful out of thin air like this. They have, and they do. They just put a whole bunch of money in it, a whole bunch of advertising in it, and then all of a sudden, it is an established entity. You want to sell, you want to sell a U.S. Army recruitment pitch. You want to recruit people. You spend millions of dollars to do a Super Bowl ad or an ad during, an NBA game or something like that. Regular people don't have those resources. And educators don't necessarily have those resources to, educators are the people who, know the truth about a lot of things. They're the ones that study things, scientists, teachers, philosophers, whatever. they don't have the resources themselves to disseminate, truthful propaganda around the world, or around their country, or around their states, or around their cities. The only way that they can disseminate conventionally is to get a job as an educator, and at that point you're teaching 20 to 100 people at a time, a certain limited amount of knowledge, and what I mean, it doesn't disseminate the information as quick as a commercial, or as a politician on CNN, saying blatant lies about Maduro is a dictator and a drug lord, and that's why we have to do a coup against him, or a coup would be acceptable, or these extrajudicial killings against boats is within reason because of this and that lie. It's very easy for them to do it, and then because they have access to millions of eyes, millions of ears, that information, that point of view does get adopted by people. Some people see it as legitimate. So, this propaganda question, this propaganda equation is, a very important thing to tackle in terms of, getting the world right. It's a huge hurdle. It's one of the biggest hurdles in solving the problems of the world, because it's one of their biggest weapons, aside from the military weapons and the force. They use propaganda. Those are the two biggest weapons that they got. This is the last quote that I'm going to do for the introduction. The audience that he most cared about, it seems, was not the public, and surely not those intellectuals who so despised his craft. He wrote for those who understood the value of that craft and could afford to make it work for them. Even as the people, understandably, distrusted propaganda more and more, propaganda was becoming even more pervasive, as its sponsors marveled at its victories. In fact, Bernays notes in this book, its use is growing as its efficiency in gaining public support is recognized. That propaganda easily seduces even those whom it most horrifies is a paradox that Bernays grasped completely, and it is one that we must try at last to understand. Just for myself, I recognize that propaganda is a thing. I try in a lot of different ways to evade it, to contextualize it, to just not put myself in the crosshairs of malicious propaganda. I don't turn on CNN, okay? I don't watch ads in between, shows and videos and sporting events and stuff like that. I try to mute things when I can, look away, do something else. But even I, as somebody who is cognizant that somebody's trying to propagandize me at all times, I'm susceptible to propaganda. I am susceptible to socialist propaganda. I am susceptible to certain echo chambers on the internet, lefty echo chambers, lefty algorithms on, let's say Twitter or Substack or YouTube or whatever. It is very hard because there's so much media, so much stimulus, to get out of that hamster wheel, and also to substantiate every claim that's made to you. Breakthrough News, I think they're great. Democracy Now!, I think they do great work. you know, different channels, Bad Faith podcast. I love all these, you know, channels, these sources. It's hard to cross-reference and substantiate every single claim that is made on these channels. You have to be a superhuman. You have to be, you know, a Noam Chomsky type, you know, even. And I'm just saying that to say, like, we're not immune. Even when knowing that we're being propagandized, we're not immune. And that's why, you know, it's just very important to always keep that at top of mind. That, like, who does this serve? The thing that I'm watching, the thing that I'm reading, the thing that I'm hearing, and not just on the media and TV, but from people. You know, if you hear opinions from people, what does this opinion serve? Who does it serve best? And that's usually more than likely going to lead you to who's responsible for that opinion, who produced that propaganda, and why did they produce it. And it take you to the truth of the matter. I don't watch a lot of movies nowadays. I don't. As I've said before, you know, it's because of that. You know, I recognize that a lot of these movies are, you know, serving different purposes or propaganda in themselves. And so I'm very picky. You know, sometimes, you know, you just want to watch something, you just turn your brain off, and it's very rare that I want to do that. Like recently I watched this movie, No Hard Feelings, I think it's called, with Jenifer Lawrence. Yeah, No Hard Feelings. Jenifer Lawrence. It's been on my list, you know, I kind of wanted to watch it. You know, Jenifer Lawrence, she's very pretty, you know, I mean, you know, she's a good actress. I thought, okay, it would be something that I would like to watch.
Who are you talking to? You keep talking about Jenifer Lawrence and sexy and pretty.
I didn't say sexy in the one. Anyway, and I watched it because of that reason, because it looked funny, and I thought, okay, well, this could be something to just get my mind off all this other stuff.
Yeah. Well, based on the trailer, I didn't really think that it was going to be something that was going to be interesting to me. Because she's sort of like, the premise of the movie is that we have this socially awkward, you know, kid who his parents are really getting involved in his sex and social life.
Yeah.
And they're concerned for him. So
they put an ad on Craigslist for somebody to date him.
Yeah, and so it's just really, it's kind of gross and invasive of his parents to do something like that.
Yeah.
And then for Jenifer to sign up for this, and, you know, obviously there's an age difference, you know. I mean, maybe he's, I guess, technically an adult. But,
yeah, he's technically like 19 or something.
But it's sort of just weird.
Okay, well.
And I don't know, and his parents shouldn't have done that, is my feeling on it, but...
Well, yeah, and that's kind of the feeling of the movie too. That's how it ends, but
I'm not the target of not the target audience. Obviously, it's like a male target audience for this kind of movie.
Definitely.
Young male target audience, maybe around his age or younger.
Okay. Well, why I'm bringing it up, because it's the only movie I've seen in the last few months, but it starts with a close-up of the Ford symbol on this truck, right? And
product placement.
Very, very product placement. You know, we shoot back. We see that it's this tow truck. This tow truck on the way to Jenifer Lawrence's house. It's a nice, you know, little setup scene of this, you know, classic Americana sort of town, and it goes to this house. 2-story, nice, you know, white and red painted house.
Yeah.
It's a very nice house. And it's like, okay, this is the quintessential American life right here. All of a sudden, the tow truck's trying to tow this truck in the driveway. Jenifer Lawrence comes out. It's her car.
Yeah.
She's pleading with the guy who is actually an ex-boyfriend. to not take the car
Why is he taking her car?
because she hasn't made her payments.
But he had to be the one to take it. Why?
Because of plot purposes. But anyway, so, there's a little bit of a certain propaganda right there. Product placement in movies. Why is that needed? Okay?
Well, these are their sponsors.
These are sometimes some funders, some producers.
Sometimes there's no reason. There's no reason for you to shoot something like front and center if they're not paying you.
No, that's not true, because a lot of people, a lot of creators, they'll be like, okay, well, what are some labels, some things that will evoke the thing that we're trying to convey with this movie? We're trying to convey that this is the quintessential, American town lifestyle. Okay, what type of truck is going to pick up the car? Is a Ford, an American made, So and I've seen it in many different movies. The Ford is used a lot to evoke America, because it's an American brand,
Yeah.
And the whole drama of the movie is that she's in danger of losing her house. This was her mom's house. She does Uber and she needs the car.
Well, you can't afford a house on Uber. Definitely
well, she needs the...
Definitely not. That was your...
Okay, well, it's unrealistic in that way. But, well, supposedly the house is basically paid off or almost paid off, right? Her mom was the owner of the house. She passed away recently.
Oh.
And she was making the payments, doing Uber and different things, and they're towing the truck. They towed her car. Mm-hmm. So now she's like, I have this whack-paying job as a bartender for this yacht club.
So she has two jobs. She does Uber and she's a bartender.
Yeah.
Okay.
And
there's nothing more American than that, having two jobs to not even support yourself properly.
Sure. And she has these friends, right? She's got a couple friend, which is a lady and a man. The man they're all like surf buddies, right? Mm-hmm. They all grew up together in this town. And they have this talk one day because she sees the listing and she's like, should I do it? They're advertising a car and money. That would really help me out in my situation. It's kind of a sleazy job to pick up, but maybe I should do it.
Well, how's the job advertised?
Like that, like all you gotta do is date my son. He's a nice guy. He's just a little socially awkward. Get him out of his shell before college, and we'll give you our car. We'll give you a car. She's talking to her friends, and one of her friends is this Native American guy, right? And the other two friends, one of them is a white dude, and the other is like this Latina white passing lady, right? She's pregnant, okay?
Okay.
And one of the jokes that she makes in this conversation with her friends, which she's really mostly talking to the couple, right? The Native American guy is a lawyer as well. He helps Jenifer Lawrence out with the legal questions and stuff regarding getting the car back and what's happening with her house potentially, losing her house and stuff like that. He's used as a character for that and for being a Native American minority friend,
Token minority.
And there was this one joke that's like, Jenifer Lawrence making this joke like, hey, we are, people from up north are coming to our town and they're raising the prices of things and it's making it harder for us to stay here and live here.
Her little quaint Midwest American town is becoming gentrified.
Yeah, it's in California actually. We're in the West Coast.
But is there a lot of minorities living there? She just happens to be white or something?
No, there's a lot of white people there.
Oh, okay.
It's like a white town.
So the poor whites are being gentrified. Yeah,
and so she makes this joke like, do you know how it feels for some people, out of your community to come and take your land or take your And then she looks at her Native American friend. He doesn't say anything. He just gives her a little look, and she's like, "Oh yeah, of course you do," you know.
Well, okay.
Which, okay, you know, they're supposed to be friends and stuff like this. He doesn't get a lot of speaking opportunity in the movie. It kind of rubs me a certain way. It does scream very tokenism, and it's painting this picture of like the main drama is economic based, and it's based on gentrification and stuff like this. Gentrification historically and, you know, contemporarily affects mostly minority communities, okay? But this Hollywood movie is making it seem like it's painting it as it's affecting this white lady, this white suburban lady. And this is a theme throughout many Hollywood movies. Not just that, you know, everybody has to be white. The world through Hollywood's eyes is a white world.
It's like an all lives matter sort of.
Yeah. It's diluting the problem. They hardly talk about the it's a comedy, so I understand.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who might find humor in that.
In what?
Like making that sort of parallel, like, oh, the same thing that the minorities experience, the white people experience too. And she made a little joke to say, you know what that feels like, you know, to have everything taken away from you, you know, by some people who have more resources, more power, more of everything than you do.
Yeah. So I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up because it's kind of like, and there's just another example of the way that even fiction can, you know, paint a picture of the world that kind of misconstrues reality, you know. Yes, it's mentioning gentrification. Yes, it's mentioning the existence of Native American plight, but it's all passive. It's all very passive, and it's all you know, like, this is just you know, how the world is, and, you know, this is
I mean, I would say, I mean, it's much harder to find a Hollywood produced film that actually, you know, making any commentary on any real issue in a real way. It's always very superficial. What's there to be examined about something like that?
This is what most
was
people
not even
watch.
well intentioned, you know.
These types of things are what most people watch.
Yeah.
So this is what people recognize, are familiar with, and will continue to be part of their media diet. So, you know, if you want to kind of, you know, sort of educate or help people along with a deeper analysis and recognizing the more subtle propaganda, the more subtle messaging that's in things like Hollywood movies, is important to bring it up and to kind of analyze it, not just as a oh, was it funny, or oh, was it, you know, sexy, or oh, you know, did they have a great soundtrack and this and that. You know, it's important to do those things because then, you know,
I get what you mean from that. You're right.
Decent analysis.
You're sort of meeting people where they're at.
Sure. That's what I want to say on that movie.
Well, all you really talked about was the tokenism.
Okay, well, I can mention a few more things.
But I really need to pee, though. I've really been holding it in.
Okay, then forget it.
But
thank you
I
for joining the podcast.
I could be back in 2 seconds. And...
No, thank you for joining the podcast.
What? That's it? I'm being played off? I'm being played off with the podcast? Just because I have to pee?
Me too, I gotta pee too.
Okay.
So thank you for your cooperation.